You clicked because you saw half an acre and 11 animals and no chickens. That is exactly the plot of land I want you standing on right now. Picture it, a yard smaller than most suburban lots, and on it, quietly, more meat, more eggs, more milk, and more fertilizer than a family of 4 could eat in a year. Here is the claim I need you to sit with. On 1/2 of 1 acre, without a single chicken, an Amish family I came to know raises 11 kinds of animal that feed them nearly year-round, and they spend almost nothing to do it. I did not read that in a book. I watched it, season after season, on a farm outside Millersburg, Ohio, where a man named Amos ran his whole operation on land you could walk across in 90 seconds. Before this is over, I am going to hand you something I found buried in a farm bulletin from the 1880s, a single overlooked animal that colonial families guarded so closely that keeping it was once tied to your standing in the community. And I promise you this works whether you own 40 acres or a backyard with a fence you already paid for. I want to be honest with you before I go one word further. I did not believe any of this. I spent most of my life buying my meat shrink-wrapped, my eggs by the dozen, my milk by the gallon, and I thought people who talked about raising their own food were either rich or dreaming. I had a mortgage. I had bills. I had a lawn I mowed every Saturday for 30 years and got absolutely nothing back from it. So when I first drove out to Amos's place, I went as a skeptic. I went to prove that it could not be done on that little land. I was wrong. And the way I was wrong changed how I look at every yard I pass now. The first thing Amos showed me was not a cow. It was not a goat. It was a row of wooden hutches against the north side of his barn, up off the ground, shaded, quiet, rabbits. I almost laughed. I thought rabbits were a child's pet, something you win at a fair. But Amos looked at me and said one sentence I have never forgotten. He said, "More meat comes off this wall than off my whole pasture." Let me tell you why he was right. Because the numbers stopped me cold. A single doe, a mother rabbit, can produce somewhere around 40 to 50 offspring in a year if you manage her breeding the way the old-timers did. That is not a guess. Back in 1943, when meat was rationed and the country was scared, the United States Department of Agriculture put out a bulletin pushing families to raise rabbits at home for exactly this reason. They knew a doe could turn a pile of garden scraps and grass into more pounds of lean meat, pound for pound of feed, than nearly any animal a small family could keep. Rabbit meat runs high in protein and very low in fat, and a backyard trio, 1 buck and 2 does, can put dozens of pounds of meat on your table in a year from a footprint smaller than a parking space. But here is the part Amos said almost under his breath, the part that turned rabbits from a curiosity into the cornerstone of everything. He bent down, scooped up a handful of the pellets under the hutch, and dropped it straight onto his garden bed. No waiting, no pile. Rabbit manure is what the old farmers called a cold manure, meaning it will not burn your plants the way fresh cow or horse waste will. You can lay it down the same day. And it is loaded with nitrogen. So the same little animal that feeds your family is quietly feeding your soil at the same time for free every single day. I stood there doing the math in my head and feeling foolish for every bag of fertilizer I had ever carried out of a hardware store. But rabbits were only the first wall of the barn, because the moment I thought I understood his system, Amos turned me around and showed me something even smaller and even stranger. Stacked in cages no bigger than a milk crate were birds I did not recognize. Little speckled things, quick and quiet, quail, Coturnix quail, to be exact, and I made the same mistake I made with the rabbits. I thought, what good is a bird that small? Then Amos handed me an egg the size of my thumbnail and told me to crack it, and told me its story. A Coturnix quail goes from a hatched chick to laying her own eggs in about 6 weeks. 6 weeks. A laying hen takes 5 or 6 months before she gives you a single egg. These little birds start feeding you before the chicken is even finished growing up, and they lay generously, often close to 300 eggs a year from a single hen, from a bird you can hold in one hand. 3 of those little eggs equal about 1 chicken egg, and they are richer, higher in yolk. The Japanese domesticated these birds centuries ago and prized them so much that quail keeping became its own quiet tradition, passed down carefully long before anyone was selling them in a feed store. Here is why Amos loved them, and why you should be leaning in right now. A quail needs almost no room. You can keep a whole covey, enough to give a family eggs every day, in the space a single chicken would take up. They are quiet, they do not crow, and this is the part that matters if you live where I think some of you live, close to neighbors, close to a road, close to people who notice things. A person can raise these birds in near silence, in a shed, in a garage corner, on a back porch, and produce a steady stream of protein without a soul knowing. I remember driving home that first night, and I could not stop thinking about how much space I had wasted my whole life. My lawn, my empty side yard, 30 years of mowing grass that fed nothing and no one. But I want to stop here and tell you something, because up to this point you might be thinking the same thing I thought. You might be thinking, this is fine for a man with a barn and plain clothes and a lifetime of practice, but it has nothing to do with me and the ordinary house I already live in. Hold that thought, because I am going to come back to you directly. There is a reason this knowledge nearly disappeared, and it is not because it stopped working. The reason is simple, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Somewhere along the way, we were quietly taught that food comes from a store and a store only. Every gallon of milk you buy, every carton of eggs, every package of meat keeps you tied to a system that needs you to stay a customer. And the animals Amos kept threatened that system in the most peaceful way imaginable. They made him a customer of no one. So let me show you the animal that broke my resistance completely. The milk. I always believed you needed acreage and a big barn and a full-size cow to have your own milk. A dairy cow can weigh over 1,000 pounds and eat you out of house and home. But Amos walked me to a small pen, and standing in it were 2 goats no taller than my knee. Nigerian Dwarf goats. Little things. And he told me those 2 animals gave his family fresh milk nearly every day of the year. A good Nigerian Dwarf doe can give somewhere between 1 and 2 quarts of milk a day, and here is the thing nobody told me. Their milk is higher in butterfat than a big dairy cow's, which means richer cream, and it makes cheese and soap and butter beautifully. 2 of these goats will fit and thrive on a patch of ground where you could never dream of keeping a cow, and they eat a fraction of the feed. The plain communities have leaned on small dairy stock like this for generations because it fits their scale, their land, and their way of staying independent of the outside world. I drank a glass of that milk at Amos's table, warm, and I am telling you, as a man who spent 60 years buying milk in plastic jugs, I had never tasted anything like it. But goats gave me my first real jolt of something darker, and I need to share it with you because it is the moment my skepticism turned into something closer to anger. I asked Amos why more people did not do this, why every family with a decent yard did not keep 2 little goats and stop buying milk forever. And he just looked at me with that patient look and said, because somebody has to sell the milk. That sentence sat in my chest the whole drive home. Now, I promised I would come back to you, the one sitting in an ordinary house, maybe on a normal street, thinking this is a nice story about a man on a farm and nothing more. This next part is for you specifically, so stay with me. You do not need a barn to start. You do not need permission from anyone to do the very first thing I am about to tell you, and you can begin it this week with things you already own. Here it is. Start with the quail or start with the rabbits, because both of them live in a hutch or a cage, not on land. A rabbit hutch can sit on a patio, in a garage, along the side of a shed. A quail setup can live in a corner most people never use. You are not plowing a field. You are not buying acreage. You are taking 3 feet of space you already ignore and turning it into food. And here is the technique you can use this week with nothing special at all. The old-timers and the Amish still do not throw away a scrap of kitchen waste. Your carrot tops, your lettuce ends, your stale bread, the greens most people scrape into the trash, all of it becomes rabbit and quail feed. That waste you already generate, that you already pay to haul away, becomes protein and eggs and meat. You reduce your grocery bill and your feed bill at the same time from garbage you were throwing out yesterday. You do not need to buy a thing to begin understanding how this feels. Save 1 week of vegetable scraps and just look at the size of the pile. That pile is the feed bill you have been paying a store to replace. I did exactly that before I ever bought a single animal, and seeing that pile was what finally convinced me. But once you accept that food can come from a corner of your yard, a whole world opens up, and Amos was only getting started with me. Because next he took me to the water. He had a small pond, more of a large puddle really, dug by hand, lined and simple, and on it floated ducks unlike any I had ever seen. Muscovy ducks. Big, calm, strange-looking birds with red faces. And Amos told me these were the quiet workhorses of his whole yard. A Muscovy is not really the same as the loud white ducks people picture. They are quieter, they are excellent mothers who hatch and raise their own young without any help from you, and they are one of the best natural pest controllers a homestead can own. They devour slugs, flies, mosquitoes, and the larvae that plague a garden. Amos told me he had not bought fly control or bug spray in years, because the ducks patrolled every inch of his ground for free, and Muscovy meat is lean and closer to a fine red meat than the greasy duck people expect. If that question has been sitting in your chest too, I want you to know that everything I learned following Amos through that half-acre, the animals, the systems, the history behind all of it, I put into a book called The Amish Blueprint, and it is available now through the link in the description. It walks you through exactly how these 11 animals work together, step by step, so you do not have to stumble onto a farm in Ohio to figure it out the way I did. Every chapter is built for someone starting from an ordinary yard, not a 100-acre homestead. Then, right beside them, he kept a smaller, busier duck, the khaki Campbell. And if you want eggs, real eggs, in serious numbers, listen closely. A khaki Campbell duck can outlay most chickens, giving close to 300 eggs a year, larger than a hen's egg, richer, and prized by every baker who has ever tried one. These birds were developed in England in the 1890s by a woman named Adele Campbell, who bred them specifically to be a laying machine for the ordinary household. More than a century ago, someone was already solving the exact problem you and I face today, and her birds still outperform. So now, on this half-acre, I had counted rabbits, quail, dwarf goats, Muscovy ducks for meat and pest control, and khaki Campbell ducks for eggs. 6 kinds of animal, and I had not walked more than 50 steps from where I parked. But Amos stopped me, put a hand on my shoulder, and said the next one is the one everybody forgets, and it is the one that pays for all the others. He pointed to 2 white wooden boxes at the edge of his garden. Bees. Now I flinched, the way most people do, but Amos explained something that reframed the entire property for me. Those 2 hives were not just making honey, though a single healthy hive can produce 30, 40, even 50 pounds of honey in a good year, honey that never spoils, that stores for decades, that the plain communities have used as food and as medicine for as long as anyone can remember. Archaeologists have found honey in ancient tombs still perfectly edible after thousands of years. It is the one food that does not rot. But the honey, Amos said, was almost a bonus. The real gift was that those bees pollinated every fruit tree, every vine, every vegetable on the whole half-acre, and on his neighbor's land too. His garden yields jumped because of them. The same 2 boxes that gave him medicine and sweetener also multiplied the harvest of every other plant he grew. One animal, if you can call an insect that, quietly lifting the output of everything around it, and here is the buried history that got under my skin. Beekeeping is one of the oldest partnerships between people and animals on Earth, and for centuries in Europe, the beehive was a symbol of a well-ordered, self-sufficient household. A family with bees was a family that needed no one. That is why the skill was kept, taught son to son, in communities that valued independence above convenience. I was standing there, 7 animals in, and I finally understood that this was not a collection of pets. It was a machine. Every part fed another part. The rabbits fed the garden, the ducks protected it, the bees multiplied it, the goats turned weeds into milk. Nothing was wasted, nothing was bought that could be grown. But I still did not know the strangest one, and this is where Amos lowered his voice, because the next animals were the ones that made his neighbors laugh at him, right up until the year money got tight and they came asking how he did it. He walked me to the top of his barn, to a loft, and inside were pigeons, rows of them, cooing, nesting, and I said what you are probably thinking. Pigeons? The birds people chase out of parking lots? Amos smiled and said, These are squab, and kings used to fight over them. Let me tell you what I learned, because it stunned me. A young pigeon, a squab, is one of the most tender, most prized meats in the world, served in the finest restaurants for a price that would make you gasp, and the birds raise themselves. A pair of pigeons mates for life, builds its own nest, lays eggs, and both parents feed the young. You do almost nothing. They fly out, find much of their own food, and come home on their own. Amos fed them scraps and let them forage, and they returned every night to a loft he built out of scrap wood. From almost nothing, he pulled a gourmet meat that most people could never afford to buy. And here is the historical thread that made my jaw drop, the one I hinted at when we started. Keeping pigeons in a structure called a dovecote was once so valuable that in parts of old Europe the right to keep them was a mark of standing, restricted and guarded, because those birds provided meat through the winter when nothing else could. But there was a second reason those birds were so fiercely protected, and I will come back to it, because it is the secret I promised you, and it is stranger than anything else on this list. But first Amos was not done, because 8 animals in, he pointed to a pair of large white birds patrolling the fence line, loud and proud. Geese. I thought geese were just mean. Amos taught me they were the cheapest animal he owned to feed, because a goose is almost entirely a grazing animal. It eats grass. That is it. That lawn I mowed for 30 years, that ate my Saturdays and gave me nothing, a goose would have turned into meat and rich fat and down feathers for free all summer long. A pair of geese will keep the grass down around a garden, sound an alarm louder than any dog when a stranger or a fox comes near, and provide a Christmas roast that fed families for centuries before turkey ever took over. The plain communities kept geese as living lawnmowers, guard animals, and holiday feast all in one bird that costs almost nothing to keep. Then, 9 animals in, he showed me the guinea fowl, ugly, loud, wonderful birds. And these were his front-line defense against the one thing that terrifies every rural family, ticks. A flock of guinea fowl will patrol acres, eating ticks, beetles, and pests by the thousands, and they raise a racket the second anything unfamiliar enters the property. Amos told me since he kept guineas, the tick problem that plagued his family had all but vanished. No sprays, no chemicals, just birds doing what they were born to do. I had lost count of my own doubts by now. Every single thing I believed about needing land, needing money, needing space was falling apart in front of me. But Amos saved 2 of the smallest for last, and they taught me the deepest lesson of all. He led me back to his garden, knelt down, and pulled back a board covering a shallow bin in the shade. It was full of worms, red wigglers, and he said, "These are animals too, and they might be the most important ones I own." I did not understand at first. Then he explained, "Those worms ate his kitchen scraps, his rabbit droppings, his spoiled vegetables, everything, and they turned it into the blackest, richest fertilizer known to man. The old-timers call it black gold. Worm castings will grow a garden better than any bag you can buy, and the worms multiply on their own, endlessly, eating the waste you would otherwise pay to throw away." Amos never bought fertilizer. Between the rabbits and the worms, his soil got richer every year, while everyone else's got poorer and more expensive to feed. And the 10th animal fed the 11th, because those same worms and the extra rabbits and the pests the ducks missed all became feed for the fish. Yes, on half an acre, Amos kept fish. A simple tank, a bit of water, and a hardy fish that grows fast even in a small space. In warm months he raised them on scraps and worms and the abundance of the yard, and they gave his family a source of fresh protein that needed no land at all. People have raised fish in small ponds for food for thousands of years, long before the modern world convinced us that fish only comes frozen from a truck. 11 animals: rabbits, quail, dwarf goats, Muscovy ducks, Campbell ducks, honeybees, pigeons, geese, guinea fowl, worms, and fish on half an acre, feeding a family nearly year-round, and not one chicken among them. I drove home that day a different man than the one who drove out, because I finally understood the thing the plain people never forgot and the rest of us were made to forget, that a small piece of land, worked wisely, with the right animals feeding each other in a circle, can free a family from a lifetime of buying back its own survival at retail price. But I promised you one more thing. I promised you a secret buried in an old bulletin, the one animal colonial families guarded so closely it was tied to their very standing, and now I am going to give it to you, because it is the pigeon, and the reason is not the meat. Here is what almost nobody alive today knows. For centuries, the floor of a pigeon loft, the accumulated droppings, was one of the most valuable substances a family could own. It was so rich in nitrogen that it was prized above nearly every other fertilizer on earth. But it went further than the garden. Those pigeon droppings were the primary source of saltpeter, the essential ingredient in gunpowder, and in more than one country the ruler claimed the contents of every dovecote by law because it was that precious. Farm records and agricultural writings going back centuries describe pigeon manure as worth many times the value of ordinary barnyard waste, hauled out carefully and sold or spread on the most important crops. A family that kept pigeons did not just have meat. They sat on a small mine of the richest fertilizer known to the Old World, renewing itself every single day from birds that fed themselves. Amos knew this. He collected that manure and put it on his fruit trees, and he told me those trees had never grown so heavy with fruit as they did the years after he built that loft. A gourmet meat that raises itself, and beneath it a daily supply of the most concentrated garden gold in agricultural history. That is the animal everyone chases out of the parking lot. That is the one your great-great-grandparents would have guarded like treasure. The plain communities never stopped knowing this. While the rest of us learned to see pigeons as pests and worms as bait and quail as too small to bother with, they kept the whole quiet system alive, passed down, working, waiting for someone like you to remember it. So here is what I want you to carry away, and it is not a fact, it is a feeling. You were not born to be a lifelong customer of your own dinner. Somewhere back the line, your family knew how to feed itself from a patch of ground the size of the one outside your window, and that knowledge was not lost by accident. It was crowded out, quietly, by everyone who profits when you stay dependent. If you are the kind of person who has always felt in your gut that things used to be more solid, more self-reliant, more real, and that something valuable got shelved so somebody else could keep selling it back to you, then you already understand what this whole story is really about. You are not behind. You are remembering. So let me ask you one thing, and I want you to actually answer me. Out of all 11, which one surprised you the most? The quail that lays in 6 weeks, the little goats that give richer milk than a cow, or the pigeons hiding a fortune in fertilizer under their feet? Tell me in the comments, and tell me where you are watching from, because I read them, and I love knowing who is out there remembering this with me. And if you felt something click today, something that said this matters, then stay with me, because this is a growing circle of people digging up what was buried and putting it back to work in ordinary homes on ordinary streets. Subscribe and stand with us. The next thing I am going to show you is the one plant the Amish grow along every fence line that quietly feeds half of these 11 animals for free all season long. And the reason almost no one plants it anymore will make you shake your head. I will see you there. This video walked you across Amos's half-acre, but I couldn't fit it all in here. Inside the plain living circle, I lay out the full Millersburg system, the piece this video only had room to start. And you can ask me your own questions and I answer you myself, not some machine. You won't be doing this alone. Folks like you are already inside. Just point your phone at the code on the screen. Cancel anytime with one click.